person can be caught up in that, thinking that they've got great clarity and their identity is in their great clarity or their great ability to be the witnesser or the observer. That's an interesting point. It's a useful point in the, let's call it the development, if we want to name it in that way. And yet that has to be let go of too.
Yes.
In the end, this is a very brave step where you actually step into nothing. There are no guarantees. There's no result. There's no certificate. There's no diploma. There's no degree.
Right.
It is just like, it's like stepping off the edge of a cliff.
Yes.
Because it's ego death.
Yes.
And in a very real sense, it's not particularly pretty stuff. And yet that's what is required. It's that final letting go.
Welcome to Letting Go and the Greatest Secret, where we explore the end of your suffering and the beginning of lasting happiness. I'm Hale Dwoskin, and today we'll be interviewing Kalyani Lawry, who is featured along with me in Rhonda Byrne's book, The Greatest Secret. For the past 11 years, Kalyani Lawry has presented non-dual programs and retreats in Australia and Europe, as well as individual sessions in person and by Zoom. She is the author of Only That, and her most recent work was published in 2020 in the Dutch non-dual journal Inzicht. Kalyani lives in Melbourne, Australia, with her husband, Peter. The book, The Greatest Secret, is a good primer for people, I believe. It's not the end game, but it's certainly a nice step for many people. And so I'd love to hear your take on the basic message of the book, and anything else you want to share about that, and then we'll take it from there.
Yes, well, it's a really good book, I think. It's as Rhonda said, it was written so that folk who have not had any contact with non-duality or necessarily read anything much on spirituality can dive right in. So it's a really good intro, but not only just an intro talking about it, actually takes you into touching some of those spaces that are mentioned. And she has a summary at the end of the chapters and some suggestions and exercises, and I think it does the job well. This is as she said, it's written so that her mother and father can understand it, and I think that's a lovely way of working towards making it easy and open for everyone. And of course, those people who really are touched by it will then go on to explore this further, and I think she understands that, and that's in the writing, and she has lists of books and of people she suggests may be able to help in this manner. And I think the underlying message of it is this greatest secret. This secret, in essence, is in plain view.
Yes,
and all of the
very
masters
much so.
And all of the masters will tell you this. They'll say there's nothing to get, there's nothing to achieve, there's nothing that can be given to the aspirant. It simply is what is. It's already here. But of course, it's their habit of the thinking that madly goes into trying to get an endpoint, trying to become self-realized, trying to achieve the goal, that is the very thing that gets in the way of this seeing. So it's a kind of paradox. It takes considerable effort, and yet the efforting can be the very problem of that clear seeing. So
yes, it often is, isn't it? It often is. People turn it into a goal, like a material goal for a person. And one of the things I like to remind my students is that realization or enlightenment or whatever you want to call it, most of the words are just too broad and too self-important almost. But recognizing the truth of who you are is not it's not for you, it's from you. Because if you're doing it as a person to get some end benefit, even if that end benefit is enlightenment, that very act is an obstacle. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And this having an end point, realization, well, enlightenment, whatever we like to call it,
yes,
is an object. So
yes.
we've created another object. There's an entity, a seeming entity, who's wanting to achieve this particular state, and state is always future, of course.
Yes.
So there you've got, and then it binds even more in that whole duality. A me wanting to get to this in some future time. So the thing gets more and more complicated.
Yeah. Oh boy.
And
yes. Unnecessarily.
Yes. And everyone tastes this stuff. Everyone tastes this stuff. Sitting on the beach, extraordinary sunset, and there can be a moment where everything stops. There is no watching or doing on the part of any person. There is just sunset. Sunset is happening, and there's the total experiencing of that sunset. And most have had tastes of this throughout their lives.
Oh, definitely.
So this is nothing magical, or it's just that simple, as described in one of the Buddhist texts, simple, ordinary awareness.
Yes.
And something that we are never, ever away from.
Yes. And in fact, it's there even when we're sitting on a subway train in New York City, or stuck in traffic, or yelling at our husband or wife, or trying to prevent our children from doing something crazy. It's it always is here.
Well, the Mahavakya, one of the great statements is, everything is that, or that thou art. And, basically everything is the thatness. Everything is awareness. So it's not like some things are more of awareness and other things aren't. A lovely sunny day is closer to it, and a rainy, stormy day isn't. It's like there's no discrimination. Everything is thatness, playing and expressing and dancing in a multiple of forms, seeming forms.
Yeah, seeming.
Nevertheless, forms. Yeah.
Yeah, yesterday I was thinking about it, that we this happens to me often, that spontaneously this something that I should be sharing comes to me, and what it was is I noticed that the mind was looking at some long-standing habit of the mind and thinking, well, maybe I need to do something about it. And in that moment I realized, well, I don't have a personality. We think we need to fix ourselves or improve ourselves or make ourselves better in order to discover our what's natural, and that very act is often the only distraction. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And what's being measured against?
Yes.
If something's being measured, it's not okay. I mean, against what?
Yes.
It becomes a should, and it becomes a future, and becomes an expectation, and then it's set to fail. And that thing that happens in very early developmental stuff, when we're very tiny kids, 2 or less, or 18 months, whatever the age is, where there's that sense of an entity, identity. This is a little person. They come to know themselves, and there's the self and other. And this is just straight old developmental psychology. And then, but what comes upon us at that stage is there's something wrong.
Yes.
There's something wrong. And then the very next thought that comes from that is, I've got to do something to fix it.
Right. And we spend our whole lives trying to fix something that isn't broken.
Exactly.
Only reinforcing the belief that I'm just not doing it hard enough or right, or this teacher's not giving me the solution, or this technique it's just not working. And It's just on and on and on. And it's interesting, what most of us experience when we first go in this direction is we simply substitute the worldly pursuits, like, a relationship or money or better health. We simply substitute now, okay, now I'm going to make myself okay by, getting a permanent state of truth.
Try to be out of truth.
Right.
Where do you go to be out of truth?
Definitely, there's nowhere to go. So I know you work with people one-on-one and in small groups, and it's all probably on Zoom and Skype now, as opposed to in person. What are some of the things what are some of the places that people get a little stuck, besides the obvious one we're talking about? But there's these sub places that people get stuck, and how do you help them see through these illusions?
Well, it's enormously varied, as you
Totally,
of
yes.
course you know. So every person, it's totally individual, totally individual. So it's tailoring specifically with whatever is getting in the way. And I mean, some of that can be old hurts and childhood material that just needs a little bit of housework doing to it. Mm-hmm. Other people have done years of developmental stuff, years of spiritual work, and are very, very seasoned in these areas. So pretty sharp, pretty there.
Yes.
Essentially, is that subtle seeing that any notion of being a doer or running the show is yet another fantasy.
Yes,
and that can be
important.
a kind of really subtle thing, because this seeming one that's running the show gets turned into a spiritual one or an enlightened one or whatever else it might be. So it shapeshifts over time. So it can be quite convincing. It can be a person can be caught up in that, thinking that they've got great clarity in their identity is in their great clarity or their great ability to be the witnesser, or the observer. And that's an interesting point. It's a useful point in the, let's call it the development, if we want to name it in that way. And yet that has to be let go of too.
Yes.
Definitely. In the end, this is a very, very brave step where you actually step into nothing. There are no guarantees. There's no result. There's no certificate. There's no diploma. There's no degree. Right. It is just it's like stepping off the edge of a cliff.
Yes.
Because it's ego death.
Yes.
And in a very real sense, it's not particularly pretty stuff. And yet that's what is required. It's that final letting go, that final step of. And so that is essentially the focus of the work that I would do with an individual.
Well, that's great work.
That varies. I mean, I've often thought, perhaps there's a sequence of things, but everyone is so different and different points of their journey. Some folk really need to steady their mind. They need to learn to meditate to actually understand what the issue is, because if there's no clarity about the terrain and the issues and the problems, then it's working blind as such.
Yes.
And other folks, the habit, the diligent habit of doing that is actually getting in the way. So it's a really mixed and very individual very individual thing. So I don't have any series of progressions or teachings as such. And I'm working with individuals, and we work with my husband Peter and I work with groups. We do retreats, although with all the changes in the world health, that's sort of on hold at the moment.
Right. Yeah, no, we've migrated. I know exactly what you mean. We've migrated our retreats to Zoom because that's the only way to do it. But I have to, honestly, I actually really like that because I sit at my desk wearing sweatpants and a nice shirt. And I'm talking to people from all over the world, and the
Yes.
same beauty that happens when we meet in person happens because there's no person that needs to be met. That what needs to be met in my experience is that which is beyond the person.
Yeah.
But I also agree that if it's a formula, if it's not created in the moment out of the need for whatever the person you're speaking to at the moment is presenting, then it's just a formula. And
Yes.
it could be just become part of the problem, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, it's not one size fits all. Indeed. And and to have something like that assumes something about an individual.
Yes.
There's actually no seeing of that beautiful individual with all their different characteristics and beauty. It's not honoring that and working deeply with that, because it's a beautiful energy. It's a beautiful flow, and working with someone is it's an honor. There's a sacred space that arises, and if you're presenting stuff as a formula, then there's no honoring, and there's no space for that to reveal itself.
Yes. No, I totally understand what you're saying. It's interesting. I started teaching formulas because that's what I was given. The Sedona method is a series of formulas that seem to have universal applicability. But what's always happened is in the application of the formula keeps changing and adapting to who's ever needing the support in this moment. And what tends to happen is both the group and the individual keep meeting at a deeper and deeper and deeper level of just truth and relaxation and openness, and the limitations just melt away, and then the formula disappears too.
Yeah, of course, it finds its way.
Yes.
Any formula is just an excuse to start a conversation and open.
That's right. That's right. Well, I mean, language is a formula.
Exactly. Absolutely. Indeed.
So one of the things that I know you do with people is help them come back to, we often get lost in the thoughts, the feelings, the experiences of this moment. And one of the things I know you do is help people go back and investigate the source from which that's arising. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, essentially there's a false premise, and that premise is there's separation, and there's an entity, a me notion, an I, whatever we want to call it, and everything's built from that. So it's like an inverted pyramid, and there's one assumption upon another assumption upon another assumption upon another assumption, and we all know what happens if we make a whole lot of false assumptions about something. We end up with something very topsy-turvy and something that's very far from the truth. So
definitely, yes.
Essentially, it's coming back to examining that basic premise. And that premise is the root cause of all the issues. That notion of being an entity, a me, a separate person, who has volition and is running their show.
Right.
It's a great fantasy, but if we could run the show, there'd never be any unhappiness, there'd never be bad weather, there'd never be this, there'd never be that. Control one thing, control the thoughts, control the thinking. You can do a lot of exercises, and there can be all sorts of things that can be done, but it's a fantasy.
Yes.
You say to somebody, hold your breath for a minute. I can't do it. And that's a really nice example of how it is with all of the other functioning that we think we're running. Yeah. We think we're at the control panel, and we blame ourselves for everything that doesn't go right. And then we think we're fantastic if things go well. And it's like, it becomes a really precarious up and down roller coaster, and doesn't bode well for a smooth existence.
No.
that taking ownership at a deep level.
Yes.
That deep taking ownership is what causes so much psychological pain.
Yes, because it's my pain.
Yes. And it's not to be taken away, thank you.
That's
it's
right.
been worked hard on.
Mine. I worked hard for it, right, exactly. And I have a great story about it, and I know why it's there and what it means about this imaginary me, and on and on and on, yeah.
And interestingly too, Hale, is that the more the story is told, the more it's embedded. And memory's funny stuff. It's not like a video camera. It's not accurate. Every time something's accessed, it's added to. The emotion is added to it. And you see this, with people, particularly people that you've known for a very long time. And there's been one, relatively minor incident, and it's been worked on and worked on and worked on. And 20 years later, it's turned into something that is massive. It's a huge... It's almost a trauma level, and it's changed. The content and the memory has changed dramatically. So I think that's something to be aware of, is that memory is not accurate. It's not an accurate video recall of an event. And every time it's evoked, every time it's run, it has a new layer added to it. It's given more oxygen.
Yes.
And then it becomes the story. Then it becomes the sad story of me, this and an excuse. Mm-hmm. And that's not to I'm not talking now about serious kind of deep issues and traumatic events that have happened to people. That's something quite different.
Well, and you're also not, you're not denigrating anyone. You're just
exactly
saying, be aware. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think what you're saying is just be aware that it's, if you believe everything that your memory is telling you, you may not be remembering what actually happened. I see that all the time. People will share a memory, and then when they start examining it and taking it apart and looking for the truth behind it, not the truth of what actually happened, even just the truth with a capital T behind it, they actually also see that their perception of the memory itself was completely distorted over time.
And again, it's that taking ownership, Hale, that thing of it becoming part of the identity.
Yes.
So the identity gets loaded down as I am this, and this is da-da-da-da, and this is part of my story. So the story and the bits that are cherry-picked to be part of that story, support the notion, support the identity. That gets kind of really interesting, and is all stuff that just needs to be let go of. And if of course, I'm not making light of terribly traumatic events, and that's deep work that probably needs to be addressed by very qualified people who work specifically in this kind of material.
Yes.
And it clears that reduces that, heals that, and then the other work, this, spiritual work, if you want to call it that. It's very hard to put labels on things because
Yes, language is
they're
inadequate.
not exactly.
Yeah.
Then that can begin, because
Yes.
it's not going to be loaded down by that deep past stuff, and yeah.
Totally. I just reminded me of something when you said that, probably because, we're making all the celebrations in the United States, or remembrances about 9/11 just happened.
Oh, yes.
And I was leading a retreat about 6 weeks after 9/11, and someone came to the retreat really frozen, because they were actually at ground zero. They were there for the event. And even in those 6 weeks, they were responding to any loud noise. They had severe PTSD.
Of
And
course.
what happened is, in working with them, we discovered that they had, right then in real time, realized they had created an identity around being the one who had been present for this world event. And there was already some pride developed in the fact that they were at ground zero. In them seeing that, the PTSD dissolved.
Mm.
And then they were able to release the layers of feeling that had, and really acknowledge what happened. But then it stopped becoming a whole identity they were constructing that they could take out and whenever they met anyone and discuss, and all these other things. And it was very, I haven't thought about that in a really long time, but it was very noticeable at the time, that it was like, oh, this is what we do.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Something touches deeply, and it gets rerun.
And rerun and rerun and rerun. It's true.
And embroidered.
Yes, definitely. Embellished, embroidered, touched up, edited.
Yeah.
We're constantly editing our story, and we don't even realize we're doing it.
Well,
And also,
just
have you noticed this too, that I'm sorry to interrupt, but that people also edit their story depending on who they're telling it to?
Yes. Well, somebody goes for a job, and they're going for a job for a particular position.
Yes.
So they write their CV, they write their little thing, their application, and of course they're going to cherry pick all the things that demonstrate that they're appropriate for that job, all the experiences and all the qualifications, etc. They go for a slightly different kind of job, and of course they're going to go back and select all the things that are appropriate for that. So sometimes you can look at two of these applications and they look like two different people.
Yes.
So
totally.
it's what's the real person? And this is the critical question, because it points right back to this notion of identity, what we take on, and who we imagine we are.
Yes.
As you say, as you're saying, it's the bits are picked, and the identity is then appropriated from that.
Yes, totally. I couldn't agree with you more. So you have practiced, even though you don't do formulas. There's one thing I looked at the notes. There was something you mentioned that struck me. Can you talk a little bit about what you call the melt and what that is?
Yeah, well, the melt is when the fixations, when the objects, when the seeming placement of objects, and by objects I would include not just the physical, tangible things we describe as objects, but anything that is objectified. So a thought is an object. We talk about a thought, it's a noun, it's an object. A feeling, a sensation, an emotion, a memory, an image, any of these things are objects. And the habit is that the attention fixes on these various objects. Yeah. And there can be a few things going at once. It can be a sense of sensation, a sense of feeling, a thought. Yeah, there can be a few of these little things moving around at the same time. And we fix on that. And they're in a approximate agreement. In actual fact, if the attention is taken away from all of those, because all of these things are agreed, a chair is a chair because it's a learnt thing.
Yeah. So
somebody's never seen one, doesn't know what it is, and doesn't know what you do with it.
Right.
Simple as that. So it's all learnt pattern stuff, deeply patterned, that we don't even recognize that anymore.
Yes.
So in letting those boundaries go, and one of the probably the most direct way is allowing them to rest into the space from which they arise, or rest into the background. The background is not, everywhere is background. Right here is background. Back there is background. Over there is background. Letting everything that is appearing, and that includes the internal dialogue, because often it's done with objects, seeming objects.
Yes.
We're letting everything, every sensation, letting it just relax back into the space from which it's arisen. So it's going back, it's like a little backwards thing. And you don't have to work too hard with this. This doesn't have to be a perfect exercise.
Right.
Letting it rest. And these things start to melt. And curiously, the boundaries start to get a little fuzzy.
Yes.
A little fuzzy. And things we were clear about don't have so much clarity. And these things will naturally melt back into the space from which they've arisen.
Yes.
And allowing that, a thought, without judging it, if it's thought, what we would label a negative thought, an unhappy thought, an angry thought, or whatever it might be, allowing that to relax back into the space from which it's arisen. Any of these things, letting them relax. And there is a melt. And as you know, melting, you put a piece of butter in a pan and it melts. It starts a little bit soft around the edges and it keeps melting. So that's a simple exercise. And, when you don't have hard-edged objects, be that feeling, sensation, thoughts, things you're viewing, sounds that are being heard, when they don't have a hard edge of certainty, when not being, as a Buddhist would say, fixated upon, they will naturally fall back into what, in essence, they are. That spaciousness, the melt. Cooking, all these things, all these beautiful, life teaches us, everywhere you look, nature teaches us. Just working in a kitchen will teach you, everything is there. Everything is there to tell us what's the truth is.
Yeah, everything points to that which is true. I highly agree with that. The other analogy I thought of as you were saying that is because he said melting is the if you see an ice cube floating in a glass of water, it appears solid, and that's where the label has come. It's an ice cube, or it's a person, or it's a thought, it's a feeling, and what happens when it seems solid like that? We forget that both the ice cube and the water is floating in is just water.
Yes.
And
it's the vapor that we breathe, the air that comes out, that's just, fabulous.
Yeah. And I just saw the ice cube melting as you were saying that, because what freezes it is our identification with it, our belief in it, our trying to do something with it or fix it. All those things freeze it as opposed to thaw it. So again, I just thought of that now. I think it's
Yeah, yeah,
but it really reinforces what you're talking about. Just let it melt.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
you also have an exercise called the five senses exercise. Is
Yeah,
that seems similar, but it's different, isn't it? It's something else that, though I like to give people things, even though I know it's not a formula, but people, if they're going to do it anyway, you might as well give them things to do that are going to help undo the mind's habit of
absolutely.
looking in the wrong place for the answer. So anyway, tell us
Yeah,
a little bit about the five sense exercise.
yeah. Well, I think it's very helpful to start to unpick stuff. To soften up the habits in the thinking.
Yes, yes,
And so sometimes these two are probably the exercises I would use if I'm using something.
sure.
And the melt, of course, is that relaxing back and letting everything flow into the background.
Yes,
Not background as over there, but flow into that essence, that
yes,
spaciousness in which everything is arising.
yes, yes.
And it's interesting. The five senses wide open is a Buddhist exercise, and I probably have a slightly different take because everyone seems to do that's quite normal or natural.
Yes, it's totally natural. Yes.
And it's focuses on balancing the five senses equally wide open. Now the senses are always wide open.
Yes.
You can't. You can close your eyes and you still see stuff underneath, light and what have you.
Yes, you
So
do.
they're always wide open. And the important thing about this exercise is not focusing on the content of what those senses is taking in, but just the actual sensing of those senses. So the energy of in the seeing, the capacity to see, the seeing, not the focusing and looking at. Likewise with the hearing, and I'll go through this exercise. I just want to describe this first. Not listening to particular sounds, but the capacity of the hearing. And of course, things will draw attention. There'll be a sound and the attention gets drawn to that, or in the visual, there'll be something that triggers that. So it's not about getting this perfect and even, because in a sense, it's a little bit of a choreography. Things are always moving around. Suddenly the attention, there's a noticing the attention is in the seeing, or a noticing that the attention is in hearing, or you get the seeing and the hearing and the tasting all balanced, and the other two are kind of gone off somewhere else. That's absolutely fine. The focus is on a kind of a choreographing of bringing them in, a bit like herding sheep. There's always one that's going off, and you
Yes,
just
yes.
you just bring it back. That's natural. That's normal. That's good. No problems.
Yes.
So it's people start by relaxing and then putting their attention in the seeing. That is the capacity to see, the sense of the seeing. And then equally putting the attention in the hearing and balancing the seeing and the hearing equally. So it's not objects, it's not particular sounds, even though the speaking now, of course, the attention is going to go to the words. Staying with that seeing and that hearing and balancing those two senses equally. And it'll move backwards and forwards, and that's what it does. That's quite natural. And as soon as there's a noticing that there's more attention in one than the other, you just gently bring it back. The next is the sense of feeling. Now, feeling is not just fingertips, it's body sensing, the sense of sitting on a chair, the temperature, the breathing, whatever it might be. So it's the sense of feeling, touch feeling. sensation. So now we balance that sense, the sense in the body of sensing the skin, with the seeing and the hearing. So holding those three senses wide open, equally, and balanced. Next, we add the sense of smell. Not a particular smell, but the capacity of that sense to smell. So we balance the seeing, the hearing, the touching, and the smelling equally. And as soon as it's noticed that one's run off or one's not happening or whatever, absolutely fine. Just like sheep, just herd them back again. And now we add taste, that sense of taste, the capacity to taste. Not any one particular taste, but the capacity of tasting. So we have the seeing, the hearing, the sense touching feeling, the smell, and the taste. Those five senses. So focusing on those five senses and balancing equally in those five senses. Now, like sheep, they'll always run off a little bit here and there. Just bring it, as soon as it's noticed, just bring it back. You can't fail. It's not like this can be done well or not well. And that's a beautiful exercise. I've gone through that very quickly. It's a beautiful exercise because what it does is it takes the attention out of this stuff, the thinking. And most of the time, our attention is focusing on the narrative that pops up, runs quite naturally of its own. There's no one doing that narrative. It's an automatic function.
Yes, definitely.
So it's not like there's something wrong because there's a narrative and you have to get rid of it. It's like, no. Just leave it alone. It's got its function. It's got its design function. But the focus that we give to it sometimes is just, becomes the problem because we think it's telling us the truth and it's just doing narrative stuff. That's its job. Yes. So this exercise is quite lovely. It's a traditional one, traditional Buddhist one, of balancing those five senses. And the beauty of this exercise, you can do it anywhere. If you're waiting in a supermarket with your trolley full of items to go through the checkout, you can be doing the five senses wide open.
Right.
You're waiting for your lunch. You're standing in a queue. No problem. Five senses wide open. You can do it anywhere. Yes. Don't need to sit under a tree with a stick of incense and meditate. It's simple.
Right. It's very simple. And it feels like what happens when you do that, and let me see if this is part of the intent, is that the senses become transparent, and the sensing, all the different senses, the sense of you doing it drops away. There's just the sensing itself, and there's just that spaciousness that you were talking about with the other exercise too. Aren't they pointing towards a similar thing?
Yep. And this exercise, if there's a quiet space, if this can be done for quite some time, maybe 15 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, or longer, whatever. After a while, any notion of those five senses starts to drop.
Yes.
The boundaries between the seeming senses are seen for what they are. They're arbitrary and conceptual. And all there is perceiving.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's no separation between the seeing and the hearing. There's no separation between the taste and the touch. And that gets kind of interesting.
Yes, it does. It does. And also the this is all quite interesting. It also seems to me what happens is the sense that there's a seer or a hearer or a taster or a toucher or a smeller, that also dissolves as they merge. Is that part of the intent?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, because that requires ownership. And when that narrative isn't doing its thing, then because an entity, a me notion, is simply another thought in that thinking stream.
Yes.
So without that, what's there?
Beauty. Stillness.
What's there is what's always been there, that pristine awareness, that pristine consciousness, if you want to call it, that pristine energy, that spaciousness that's never been sullied, polluted, damaged in any way whatsoever.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you. Even though you went through it quickly, I think you did it just enough. I think people can get a sense of it, so if they haven't yet explored this exercise, they could get a sense of how to do it. So I appreciate you taking enough time so we could all get a sense of it. So that's great. Thank you. So is there anything that you want to leave people with? Any thought, any perspective, anything? I mean, we've covered a lot. It's all been wonderful. But do you have any parting message?
Probably a very simple message. And that is that, a lot of the spiritual search comes about because of that sense of something wrong and that something needs to be attended to. So come back, and when there's a noticing of judgments, let them melt, let them dissolve, and honor yourself. Bow down to yourself. Trust yourself deeply, because you are thatness expressing and playing around as that seeming individual that you are. And it's as simple as that. When they say that thou art, they mean it. They don't mean, hey, with a bit of work, you'll get to it. No, it's a statement of fact of now. Absolutely now.
Yes. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Hale.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Kalyani Lawry. You can learn about Kalyani and access videos and more information by visiting nonduality.com.au. That's nonduality.com.au. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe so you have immediate access to future episodes. Please give us a 5-star rating and share it with the people you care about. If you'd like to learn more about my work, my mentor Lester Levinson's work, and the Sedona method, please visit www.sedona.com. As you explore our site, you learn the key to lasting happiness, success, peace, and emotional well-being. We have books, courses, events, and plenty of free material to explore. Again, go to sedona.com. That's SEDONA.com. Thank you for being here, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Letting Go and the Greatest Secret.